really know if I should upload this recording. It's probably quite embarrassing. But anyway, so I mean, this is really sci-fi speculation on my part, but I do think that, and I can't imagine that the idea that I'm about to present might be novel. It surely must have been conceived by at least some other person thinking about some other science fiction uh, author, or just anyone who's a, what do they call it, a futurist or a technologist or something like that. I'm sure has had similar ideas to this. But anyway, I think that the idea of colonizing Mars is not a good idea. Um, Mars has much less gravity than planet Earth. I think you're it's much more feasible to colonize I don't know, a moon of Jupiter or something like that. Although that's quite far away from the sun, uh, I don't know if there is actually a suitable other kind of celestial body that's worth colonizing. I think that there's an entire alternative though, to colonizing a solar orbiting. Um, anyway, so this alternative to get it, I mean, just to sort of talk about it, to get the ball rolling or whatever, uh, like, I think the first thing that should be done is that we should set up moon bases, like at least six or seven or five or something like that, where along the, or probably, in my mind, I have at least seven. So what you would do is you would put six of them around the perimeter of the moon, because the moon always faces us. Um, so you would put six of them all around the perimeter, and then they would all have observation equipment. And the point of this observation equipment, and then you put a seventh on the dark side of the moon, or maybe more than one uh, in the middle of these six. And the point of these things is that they all have observation towers, and they all have some kind of projectile ballistics. And the point of this is that they can scan local space, and they can track all moving objects. And perhaps if there is something that would, and you would call this something like the Gaia Guardian system, and it would just essentially be there to sort of solve the problem that is exposed in the movie. Um, oh man, I can't even remember the name of the movie, but the movie where the asteroid is coming to attack. There are lots of movies actually on this. Uh, Armageddon. There were a whole lot of movies in the 90s about this. There are also, um, anyway, and the movie, the recent one. But anyway, so this would be a solution to that, but it would also be more than that, because what you could do is, once you tracked all the asteroids and meteors, although you would perhaps, for what I'm about to say, would be more interested in the asteroids and the meteors, is you could, and this idea was explored in this latest movie about asteroids, so I certainly didn't invent it. But what you do is then you send up missiles that have, tracking missiles, and then they are just there to kind of nudge these asteroids into different trajectories. And what you really want to do is you want to put it very far away from the Earth's orbit, but you want to sort of massage the asteroid into a stable solar orbit, um, at some place that's adjacent to the Earth orbit. And the point is that you can perhaps collect asteroids and corral them into a kind of mining field, mining as in to have their resources extracted from them. And then you've got a kind of a robotic um, processing uh, uh, infrastructure that is there to extract resources from asteroids. Probably the hardest thing to keep this kind of robotic operation going would be how you would sustain your fuel, because that would be sort of the more the maybe the harder aspect of what of the resource to make on the fly, because obviously if you can extract things from asteroids, you can certainly even get robots that are, if they're capable of building other robots or whatever, you would perhaps have the resources to do that. But propellant, unless I guess you could also find hydrogen gas in the asteroids. I don't know how common those sorts of things are, but anyway, I mean, at some point we might work out that just with solar energy and enough carbon sort of stored up in some resource, that you can kind of make methane from algae or something like that, or have some kind of living component which is capable of being protected and shielded and being fed some kind of solar energy, so that you can sort of make biofuel to keep the operations. Anyway, like, I don't, you can see how speculative all of this is for me, but anyway, the point is that you will then get access to resources in space, which will be also worth a lot more than resources on the Earth, because resources on the Earth have to be exported into space, and that's very expensive because gravity is a lot of initial work to work against, or to overcome. Anyway, so the point about this is that not only do you get to protect planet Earth with a moon system, uh, that will also give opportunity to understand space, because with observation stations on the moon, also observation stations that are capable of protecting each other, because they can also, obviously they would have to have lots of shielding on them, because the moon gets impacts all the time from debris, but obviously you would want these moon bases to have shielding that they could take that impact. But if there was a larger piece of asteroid or something like that, or that, then they would also be able to defend, the moon bases would be able to cover each other and defend each other by making sure that they can see all of space, that they're on a moving platform, because the moon is orbiting the Earth, and they've got eyes out into the local space, and then they can make sure that they have a handle on all objects around us. So, it really is, I think, valuable in that way. And then as this, and then if there is a large object coming towards the planet, then it can also just be nudged away from far away. You could send a rocket after it to make, a homing rocket that would connect with that thing, and it would, nudge it off course to make it safe. But then also you could nudge it, if you could control the nudging in such a way that you could just kind of corral it into a safe alternative pen, where perhaps it could be mined or extracted from. Anyway, so that's the basic idea. And then the conclusion to this is an alternative to colonizing other planetoid bodies, because I do think that it would be much better to create an artificial city in space, an artificial space station that, you know, usually you use some kind of central fugal motion to replicate gravity. Um, you have to have a very large thing that is spinning essentially, and then you can recreate gravity. And I think that is the you really do want to recreate the gravity of Earth. I do think for health reasons, for physiological reasons, I don't think you can really get around that kind of stuff too much. I think that uh, trying to exist on a planet with a third of the gravity of planet Earth is just a bad idea. Um, I mean, maybe, the challenges of making a space station that's something like a city and not being on a planet, you have problems of shielding from debris in space, you have problems of shielding from um, radiation, uh, cosmic rays, so you do have to put a lot more energy to do the work that a planet with a living core, because Mars does have a molten core. If you don't have a molten core in a planet, you don't get the benefit of electromagnetic um, shielding from things like the sun. Um, I also actually believe that the brain does not do well in the void of space without the background magnetic field provided by um, a planet. So I do, but I mean that is not hard to reproduce. You can create a machine that will create a kind of a simulated magnetic field that the planet produces. I actually think that this is, um, I mean, nerves and the brain use kind of electrical impulsing. I think it is perhaps too unnatural to go, like people think that we don't really actually have, human beings don't have a space station. The International Space Station is technically not in space. Um, it's not beyond the ionosphere. It's within um, the magnetic influence of the magnetic field of the planet. Um, it doesn't need as much shielding as it would need if it was actually really in space. Anyway, so although trying to create a completely artificial living environment beyond a planetary body does require perhaps more energy, it's going to be uh, more energy expensive. Um, but yeah, I mean, once you get past, if you really have to create surplus energy, if you already have to do so many things, like if you scale up something big enough, you don't really have to worry about these things too much, because if you've got some kind of, first of all, if you're in space, you can use um, solar panels much more effectively. All you basically need is a way to protect the thing that is floating in space, and perhaps the technology would have already been perfected from the moon-based stuff or whatever, that you could protect this floating city or something like that. That would also have this kind of internal moving. Uh, and you see, when you put it in those terms, it sounds more icky. People, I imagine, they don't want to, it's not as comforting as living on a planet, living in the middle of space, mining things in space. It seems very up in the air. It seems very, isolating and less, grounded and down to earth, all these sorts of things. But I really think that kind of, that puts it in a much more perspective. I think what makes the colonization of Mars alluring or seductive or appealing, I mean, apart from, the surviving, beyond having consciousness survive if anything really bad happens to planet Earth, is that the idea is that Mars can be a substitute Earth, or that it can be a kind of an Earth 2.0, or it can be rehabilitated or cultivated into a terraformed environment, and that it'll be the same as Earth in terms of the potential that the planet Earth symbolizes in our psyche, or something like that. And when you actually concretize the potential of continuing consciousness or life beyond the planet into a space station, it seems less mystified, because you can't imagine, oh well, maybe, if you look under the crust of the earth you'll find a Jules Verne cavern, or you'll find some, mystical sort of thing. If you are building it from asteroids in space, the only thing that you have to go off of is the human being itself, as it were, the understanding of the human being, the self-direction of the human being. You have to have a different kind of mentality, a different kind of faith, let's just say, that has perhaps graduated from some of these, sort of quaint, um, uh, magical thinking creature comforts that, I do think that sort of the idea that, oh, we must colonize another planet is, in terms of overlooking this other alternative of just creating a space city, is somewhat, um, it itself has overlooked the challenge of bootstrapping responsibility or accountability for, uh, it's trying to sort of hedge against the bootstrapping responsibility by, you know, well, maybe there's some, secret mythical planetary, um, mystique that, that, that our psyche longs to be nestled in some anti bootstrapped mentality. Where I do think that the idea of colonizing space is in some sense much more forthright and entrepreneurial and practical. And the idea is that if you're in the middle of space, you perhaps have to worry, what if the aliens take all the good asteroids away from us, or what if we break up into tribes in space and we run out of resources? And this idea is something like that the planet is something like the symbol of an like a stable basis that then everyone has to collectively orientate themselves around the carrying capacity thereof. Whereas the carrying capacity of space is kind of like, is somewhat, the potential of it is obviously much bigger than any planet, but somehow it's less indefinite. It's somehow the finiteness of a planet gives us more comfort in its sort of bounded potential, whereas the limitless potentiality of space, um, seems more definitive in its. Anyway, so I do think that there's a kind of cognitive dissonance which is being embraced by, sort of the obsession with colonizing Mars and not just going straight into space, which in my view would actually be, probably more feasible, as far as I can tell. I mean, well, I mean, I guess on some level it would seem harder because, you need the amount of raw materials that you would need to construct something large enough that would sort of be able to traverse all, let's say, the entry costs into having a functional, you know, but yeah, I mean, so perhaps it is a, perhaps, there are practical reasons why colonizing space is put, sort of for a later on period, and colonizing Mars is a more proximate goal. But I do think that sort of it lacks imagination, and the kind of the springboard to have this kind of colonization of space, as far as I can tell, would be something like the Gaia Guardian system, or whatever you want to call it, or some kind of Earth defense um, array of moon bases. Um, and by the way, these moon bases, I don't think that people need to be on these moon bases. They could all be uh, monitored remotely. And also just, I think that they would be, because the moon has no atmosphere, so setting up telescopes there, or um, you would also be a huge scientific um, boon for studying uh, neighboring uh, stars, and neighboring solar systems, and perhaps, or not just neighboring, but also things from far away. But anyway, um, I guess that's the end of this very small idea.